Okay, everyone. Hello, welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Himbar. This is not how I normally record. Um, if you watch me, you're aware of that. Uh, I'm recording on StreamYard. That's how I stream or have conversations with other people. My phone is being really weird. It has been. I didn't have it come out with a weekly update on Saturday because of that issue. I'm trying to record a video for Wednesday, which is when this should be coming out. Um, and I had the same problem. So I'm going to do this, see if this just works for now. Um, it should be fine. I was going to talk about something, and I had gotten 20 minutes into discussing what my topic was, but it's rather a boring topic. It was just kind of something to talk about and push out. I know some people find it entertaining. In fact, I say it's boring, but more people will probably find that entertaining than what I'm about to say instead. I don't feel like repeating myself right now because I just said it. And like I said, it's boring. So today, I just kind of wanted to, this is going to be rambly because I'm not prepared for this at all. But I kind of just want to talk about variety in reading. And what I mean by that is I think it's important to read a variety of things. And hopefully I can get a cohesive thought put together. All right, so what I mean is I was watching Raf's Q&A 1,000 subscriber special live stream yesterday, and it was briefly touched on how he likes to read broadly, but he thinks it's okay if you read a lot of specific stuff. And I will agree with that general statement there. But I wanted to say that personally, I like reading both at the same time, right? So, like, I want to be very well versed in sword and sorcery, for example, and in the Forgotten Realms, for example. So, I read a lot of those. But I also like to read a lot of other things. And I know some people out there that only read fantasy. I know some people out there that only read classics. Some people that only read science fiction. Um, but I basically just wanted to say that, how do I say this? I think it's important to read more than just one thing still. Especially as a creator or as an artist. And I would actually hope that most human beings are artists in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure how true that is. I don't know. Well, some would tell you art is different, and I'm not here to talk about what is art. But anyways, in some creative field, I hope everyone involved is involved in something creative, right? And hopefully, maybe that's booktube, for some people, right? Which is one thing Raf criticized as well, actually, was how he is a little saddened by it not doing its job. So here I am trying to do my job. I think I used to be guilty of this, actually. I used to read mostly fantasy published in the last, let's just say, 30 years. Okay. And I'm not trying to call anyone out, but I know so many people, even people on BookTube, even I would say even most people on BookTube, sad as that is to say, in my opinion, that do that essentially. They read fantasy, maybe a little bit of sci-fi, and it's basically all been published in the last 30 years. Some people like to focus on indie authors. That's cool. Some people like to focus on the classics, so they'll read Dune. They'll throw Dune in there. They'll throw um, Lord of the Rings in there, or The Hobbit, maybe Gorman Gast, or something else slightly older than the 90s, like Book of the New Sun, right? Or they're the people who can't. It's funny because it's like two camps almost. It's just like the people who don't want to read anything older than 30 years because they'll say it's a classic. And I disagree. I don't think 30-year-old book is a classic. Now, I don't want to talk about exactly what a classic is either. And then there's some people out there who only read what we call classics because anything new is not worth their time. And they're generally snobby and literary snobs, right? And we don't care. Anyways, but I kind of want to invite both parties essentially to do better. That's essentially what I want, right? And I'm calling myself out here too. But I feel like I feel like you get a lot more from reading a variety, right? Um, And I agree, right, with some people that you should read some indie published stuff because you're not going to get a lot of the indie published stuff from traditional publishing these days. Uh, but I'm not going to say that one is better than the other. I don't think that's the case. I think there's give and take. There's some pretty garbage stuff published traditionally, and there's pretty garbage stuff published by independent publishers or self-published. Um, I kind of don't think we should make a big deal one way or the other. I realize in some cases, like indie published stuff, that's a lot of their livelihood, right? Like a booktuber saying, especially a large booktuber, because that's not me by any means, saying this book is good will help a lot with making that author money, which I understand, Um, but I read self-published stuff, right? And I have for over a decade, and I've never made a big deal about it on my channel. And I read sci-fi, and I don't make a big deal about it on my channel either. I just read whatever the heck I want. Heck, I read a lot of nonfiction as well, and I just hardly ever talk about it on my channel. And that's probably another thing, actually, is I think a lot of people could do with reading nonfiction as well. Because I think I'm trying to remember where I even saw this actually. Where was I? It was someone talking about learning. My goodness, it's probably from one of my classes, and I just can't remember what it is. Oh yeah, it was from one of my classes. It's a philosophy class actually. And he basically said that kids go into schooling. This is at least in the United States, but it's probably the same for most Western countries. They go into school and they love learning. And when they come out of school, they've basically just been told you have to pass this test, you have to get good grades or good marks, and get this little certificate or diploma or whatever you want to call it at the end. And they come out of school not loving learning anymore. In fact, you could even go so far as to say that they just disdain it, that they'll just never do it again, essentially. And that's kind of accurate, I feel like. But I feel like still most people love learning. They just associate the idea of learning with school, and that schooling, that way of schooling doesn't work, right? So, um, at least it doesn't cultivate a love of learning. Um, and so I think um, most people could still find something that they like learning, though. But even then, you still get a lot of people who go to something like university or college or whatever you want to call it, whatever it is called, whatever it is, right? And a lot of people don't even care for learning there either, right? What they really want is just some procedural degree that makes them money. And that's cool too, right? And I'm not insulting people who do such a things. My father-in-law is a doctor, right? And a big reason he's a doctor is because he wanted to make good money. Um, why? Because he grew up poor, so it makes sense. But at the same time, he also likes helping people, and I can appreciate that. And he's a really good doctor, so I also appreciate that. Um, and he likes learning though as well, right? But there's a lot of people who I don't feel like do like learning, and I feel like if one thing besides maybe entertainment we should be getting from reading is learning. It's we should be becoming. Is that redundant? Anyways, uh, we should be better people. I feel like once we read, and I feel like reading a variety helps better with that. I know I'm being super vague and like going around in circles probably, um, but if you're just reading a fantasy, for example, published in the last 30 years, you are in an echo chamber, essentially. If you just read sci fi published in the last 30 years, you're in another one. If you're reading classics, whether they're classics from the 20th century, though most people who say they read classics from the 20th century will exclude essentially all speculative fiction, which is ridiculous. But, anyways, um, and they're in an echo chamber, right? There is a little cross pollination, which is another issue I have with academia in general, where you just have, for example, I'm interested in philology, but I also like archaeology, and archaeologists and philologists hardly seem to talk to each other ever, even though they're both studying essentially the same time and place, and I realize the field is different, the tools they use are different. But it's important to understand these things, right? In my opinion, at least it is. I could probably give you a good example if I thought about one as far as academia goes, right? Um, but I feel like once you get into that echo chamber, the people who, say, for example, read fiction from the last 30 years a short handful, relatively speaking, a handful of those people will also be the writers of fiction. And almost all of them will be writing the same stuff they read. That makes for very shallow reading, in my opinion. It's very uninnovative. In a lot of ways, it's just very boring. And it's, I don't know, an echo chamber doesn't really help you for much, besides maybe some nice music, I guess. And that has nothing to do with reading right now, right? So, what I'm talking about. And yeah, so it's just, I think that's a problem. I think that's something that a lot of people could do better at. And that's, I'm reminding myself here because, for example, sometimes I don't. There's periods of time where I don't read a lot of nonfiction, or I don't read a lot of stuff. Like I'll sit here and be like, yeah, I like Socrates. And then when was the last time I read Socrates? Well, who knows? I don't remember. Um, right? And so it's just like, am I even being helpful because I don't remember what Socrates wrote, right? In some sense, right? I read a lot, so I'm going to forget a lot as well. Hopefully, I can internalize some of it, but um, but it's good to be reminded of some things, right? And it's good, I feel like, to it's richer. I think that's really one of the things I feel like, if I could say, hey, do better, read different things, get out of your comfort zone, is you'll just have a richer life. I feel like you'll learn different things. Your experience will be richer, and I think it'll help you in your art, which I hope you're doing, and whatever that is, right? And I feel like if we can understand different things better, we can help other people. And I don't think there is still value. There's still something valuable in reading fantasy published in the last 30 years. I see some people who go out and say, like, if you read anything published in the last 30 years, then you're basically woke. Which, what the heck? That logic doesn't make any sense to me. But I do like to read a lot of older stuff too. And I honestly don't want to distinguish because I have some people tell me, I have had some people tell me in the past that I read a lot of older stuff on average, and it's like, well, I read a lot of stuff published. For example, I've read a lot of stuff in 2022, published in 2022. It's true. I like to read older stuff too, because that stuff is different. It enhances my reading, and for one, it also enhances my writing. Which, again, I don't talk about much because I've had very little success. So maybe I shouldn't be talking. But I think, again, I think just if we move out a little bit from our little bower of whatever the heck it is, fantasy published in the last 30 years was the one I've used the most here, then we'll get a lot more richness, right? I feel like that's why some people are so surprised by some things. For example, like The Name of the Wind being in first person. Well, you probably haven't read a lot of other things. That's super surprising to you because a lot of other fantasy fiction published in the last 30 years has been in third person, mostly limited, very little omniscient, right? Or The Fifth Season has some in second person. Admittedly, there's not that much published in second person. Or I see some love for Sun Eater, and it's reflective, also first person tone. And it's like, well, you probably haven't read a lot of what Christopher Rocchio has read, right? For example. And that's what I think, one thing to go off there, makes that richer than, say, some other fantasy books, which I won't name any by name, where they just seem like they're building off of some guy that built off the third floor of Tolkien, and that's it. They don't know anything that's below Tolkien, right? Essentially. Or they don't even know anything that's Tolkien's contemporaries, right? Tolkien's it. Right, and that's not even anywhere near the case. Tolkien is hecka important. I will not deny Tolkien's importance. Tolkien's my guy. He's my favorite author, actually. But just to act like that's it, and in a lot of cases that's like the weird outlier. The one published in the 50s, and everything else I read is published from the 90s and beyond. That is just, I don't know, odd. I think you're hindering yourself when you do that. But I think that's just me, maybe. I feel like I'm not being very coherent. I didn't make literally any notes with this. This is, like, again, off the cuff. I was supposed to be recording something else. But that's just my thoughts. Maybe brought on a little bit by, I'm reading this book right now, The Narrow Bridge, Beyond the Holocaust by Isaac Newman. It's actually this rabbi I went to synagogue when I was younger. Actually, I'm not in any ways ethnically Jewish, um, but yeah, and so that just made me think about some things. And one thing again that at least the Holocaust can remind us of is regression in thought. And regression in thought, I think, comes from a lack of empathy, and a lack of humility, and that can definitely come from a dumb echo chamber, right? Which a large part of Germany, for example, experienced in the 1930s. And I don't want that to happen to anyone else. I'm not saying that just because you read fantasy from the last 30 years that could happen, but I think the opposite is the effect if you go a little bit out of your bounds, so to speak, is that you'll do the opposite, right? You'll progress in a sense, that you will come to be better lovers in a sense. Sorry, that's the stinking philosophy class I'm taking right now coming out, but it's just me. This is my thoughts as well. So, anyways, sorry for this. Sorry, I hope no one feels like I called you out, but I think reading a variety is still a good idea. Yeah, and there's lots of variety out there. In fact, I'll never be able to read all the stuff I want to read. So, right, and hopefully that's the same for you. And I realize when you move out of something and go more broadly, that you're probably leaving stuff behind, but hopefully you'll gain something more than what you're leaving behind. So, anyways, those are just my random thoughts. Liam Williams Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.